Wait before you scroll past this, look at what I'm holding. This is a 1975 Lincoln Memorial penny, and I want you to really look at it, because coins from this exact year have quietly sold for hundreds of dollars, some even more. Most people would toss this in a jar, spend it on a coffee, and never think twice. But there's a small window of details on this coin that could completely change its value, and I'm about to walk you through every single one of them, step by step, right now. By the time this video ends, you're going to know exactly what separates a worthless penny from a valuable one. So don't skip ahead, you're going to want to see this. Welcome back to Coin Collectin' One. If this is your first time here, this is the channel where we take ordinary coins, the kind sitting in your junk drawer or forgotten in an old jar, and we break them down piece by piece to find out what they're really worth. No hype, no fake thumbnails promising you're a millionaire, just real information you can actually use. Today we're looking at a 1975 Lincoln Memorial penny, and I'm going to walk you through its entire history, what makes certain coins from this year valuable, how to spot the details that matter, and what steps to take if you think you've found something special. If you're into coin collecting, hidden treasures, or just curious what's sitting in your spare change, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we do this every week. Let's get into it. 3. History of the Lincoln cent, 840 words. To understand why this coin matters, we need to go back to where the Lincoln cent started. In 1909, the United States Mint did something it had never done before. It put a real historical figure on a circulating coin. Before that, American coins only featured symbolic figures, like Lady Liberty. But 1909 marked 100 years since Abraham Lincoln's birth, and the country wanted to honor him in a way that would last. So the Mint introduced the Lincoln cent, and it became the first regular-issue U.S. coin to feature an actual president. The original reverse design, the back of the coin, featured 2 stalks of wheat framing the words, 1 cent, which is why collectors today call these early pennies wheat pennies. They were minted from 1909 all the way through 1958, which means for almost 50 years, every penny in American pockets had that wheat design on the back. Then, in 1959, something changed. That year marked the 150th anniversary of Lincoln's birth, and the Mint decided to update the reverse design to something more fitting for the occasion. An image of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., this new design lasted from 1959 all the way to 2008, nearly 50 years again, before it was eventually replaced by a series of commemorative designs, and later, the Union Shield design we still see today. Now here's why this matters for the coin I'm holding. This 1975 penny falls right in the middle of that Lincoln Memorial era. If you look at the back of the coin, you'll see the small building with columns. That's the actual Lincoln Memorial, engraved in incredible detail for something the size of a fingertip. If you look closely enough, and I mean really closely, you can actually see a tiny figure of Lincoln sitting inside the memorial on the coin. It's one of those hidden details that most people never notice, even though they've handled thousands of these coins in their lifetime. The other big factor in this coin's story is what it's made of. From 1909 all the way through 1982, pennies were made of 95% copper and 5% zinc. Essentially, they were solid copper coins with just a touch of zinc mixed in. That's important, because copper itself has value as a metal, separate from the coin's face value. In fact, there have been points in history where the copper inside a penny was worth more than 1 cent, which is actually illegal to melt down. But it tells you something about why collectors pay attention to the year and composition of a coin, not just its date. After 1982, the Mint switched to a cheaper composition, a zinc core, with just a thin copper plating on the outside. This was done to cut costs, because copper prices had risen to the point where making pennies out of solid copper was actually costing the government more than 1 cent per coin. So when you're holding a pre-1982 penny like this one from 1975, you're holding a coin made of the older, higher copper composition, which some collectors specifically seek out for that reason alone. So just from a historical standpoint, before we even get into rarity or errors, this coin represents a specific era, the Lincoln Memorial design, the pre-1982 copper composition, and a design that had already been running for over a decade by 1975. It's a small piece of metal, but it's carrying almost 70 years of American minting history in the design alone. And that history is exactly why coin collecting has stayed popular for generations. Every coin is basically a tiny time capsule, and today we're going to find out exactly what story this specific one has to tell. 4. Why 1975 matters, 910 words. Now let's talk about why the year 1975 specifically gets attention in the coin collecting world. Because there's a difference between a coin simply being old and a coin being valuable, and a lot of people online blur that line to get clicks. In 1975, the US Mint produced pennies at two main facilities, Philadelphia, which doesn't put a mint mark on the coin at all, and Denver, which stamps a small D near the date. Both locations produced these coins in the billions that year. We're talking well over a billion pennies combined. When something is minted in those kinds of numbers, by definition, most of them are going to remain common. That's just basic supply and demand. Coin doesn't become rare just because it's 50 years old. It becomes rare because very few examples exist in a particular condition, or because something unusual happened during the minting process. So if you're holding a normal, circulated 1975 penny, meaning it shows wear from being handled and spent over the decades, in most cases, the coin is worth exactly what it says on it. 1 cent. Maybe a few cents if a dealer is buying it in bulk for the copper content. That's the honest truth, and I'd rather tell you that up front than have you go searching for a buyer who's never going to pay you thousands of dollars for a coin like that. But and this is the part where it gets interesting, 1975 does have one genuinely famous rarity connected to it, and it's worth knowing about even though it's a bit different from what most people expect. It's called the 1975 No-S proof penny. Now to explain this, I need to explain what a proof coin even is. Proof coins aren't meant for circulation at all. They're specially struck coins, made with polished dies and planchets, sold directly to collectors in official proof sets. Starting in the 1970s, proof coins were produced specifically at the San Francisco Mint, and they were supposed to carry a small mint mark to show where they came from. But in 1975, a small number of proof dimes and pennies were accidentally struck without that mint mark. This was a genuine minting error, not something that happens in regular circulation coins, but specifically in those proof sets sold to collectors. Because it was such a rare mistake, and because so few of these no mint mark proof coins exist, they've sold at auction for extraordinary amounts of money over the years. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars in some documented cases. Now here's the important distinction I want to make crystal clear, because this is where a lot of clickbait videos get misleading. That error coin came from a special proof set that collectors purchased directly from the mint. It did not come from regular circulation. So if you're digging through pocket change or an old coin jar, the odds of finding one of those specific proof errors are essentially zero, because those coins never entered general circulation in the first place. They stayed in collector sets from the moment they were struck. So why am I telling you all this if it's probably not what you're going to find? Because understanding the difference is what separates someone who actually knows coins from someone who just watches thumbnails that say, "This penny is worth $50,000 without any context. On this channel, I'd rather you understand exactly what you're looking at and why, so that when you do go through your own change, you know what's realistic and what's not. What is realistic, though, is this. Even common date pennies like this 1975 example can carry small errors from the minting process, doubling, off-center strikes, die cracks, and those errors can absolutely add value, sometimes significant value, even on a date that isn't famous. That's exactly what we're going to check for on this specific coin in the next section. So the question isn't just, is 1975 a rare year? The real question is, does this individual coin have something unusual about it? And that's a completely different investigation. Let's go find out. Alright, let's actually get into the coin itself. I've got it right here, and I'm going to walk through both sides in detail, the same way I'd examine any coin before making a judgment on it. Let's start with the obverse, that's the front of the coin, the side with Lincoln's portrait. The first thing I always look at is the motto at the top, "In God We Trust." This has been on the Lincoln cent since it was introduced, and on this coin, the lettering is clear and well struck. I'm checking here for any doubling, meaning, does it look like the letters have a shadow or a second outline behind them? That kind of doubling can indicate a double die error, which is one of the more collectible types of mint mistakes. On this coin, looking closely, the lettering appears to be a single, clean strike, no obvious doubling in the motto. Moving down to Lincoln's portrait itself, this is Victor David Brenner's original design, and it's been essentially unchanged since 1909. I'm looking at the sharpness of his facial features, the hairline, and the fold of his jacket. On a heavily worn coin, these details get smoothed out and flattened. On this particular coin, there's a moderate level of detail retained. You can still make out his facial structure and the lines of his coat, which tells me this coin saw some circulation but wasn't in terrible shape when it stopped being used, or was picked up and preserved reasonably early. To the left of Lincoln's portrait, we have the word liberty. I always check this word specifically because it's another common spot where doubling errors show up. Again here, the lettering looks like a normal single strike, clear, legible, no shadowing. Now let's look at the date, 1975, positioned to the right, below Lincoln's shoulder. The numbers are well spaced and clearly readable. Just below and to the side of the date is where you'd expect to see a mint mark if this coin came from Denver, a small letter D. If there's no mint mark at all in that spot, that tells us the coin came from the Philadelphia Mint, since Philadelphia struck coins traditionally didn't carry a mint mark during this era. Now there's a small detail I want to point out honestly, because I think it's important not to oversell things. There's a tiny mark near the date on this coin, a small spot of discoloration. A lot of thumbnails would tell you that's some kind of rare mint error. In reality, that's almost always going to be environmental residue, could be a tiny bit of paint, ink, or even PVC damage from being stored in an old plastic coin flip for years. It's not a doubling error, it's not a repunched mint mark, it's just wear and environmental exposure that happens to coins that have been sitting around for 50 years. I want to be upfront about that instead of pretending every mark on a coin means it's valuable. Now let's flip to the reverse side. At the top, we've got United States of America, and just below that, the Latin motto, E pluribus unum, meaning out of many, one. Both of these are struck clearly on this coin, with good letter definition and no visible doubling. Below that is the centerpiece of this design, the Lincoln Memorial itself. This is genuinely one of my favorite details on any US coin because of how much fine detail is packed into such a small space. You can count the columns across the front of the building. On a well-preserved coin, you can even make out the tiny figure of Lincoln's statue sitting inside the memorial. Between the columns, it's almost microscopic, but it's there. On this coin, the columns are clearly defined, and with close inspection, you can make out the general shape of the interior detail, though it's small enough that you'd want a loupe or a macro lens to really appreciate it fully. Below the memorial, we've got 1 cent, which is the denomination marking, clearly struck with no issues. Now let's talk overall condition, because this matters a lot for value. Looking at the coin as a whole, there's an even, consistent brown copper tone across the surface, which is completely normal for a coin of this age and composition. Remember, this is that older 95% copper composition, and copper naturally darkens and develops a patina over decades of exposure to air. There's some minor wear on the highest points of the design, Lincoln's cheekbone and the ridge of his shoulder, which are typically the first spots to show wear on any Lincoln cent. But the overall strike looks strong, meaning when this coin was originally minted, the dies were in good condition and transferred a sharp, well-defined image onto the coin. Based on everything I'm seeing here, the wear pattern, the strike quality, the surface tone, I'd estimate this coin sits somewhere in the good to fine range on the standard grading scale, which we'll talk about in a bit. That's a totally normal grade for a 50-year-old circulated coin that's been handled and passed around before ending up in someone's collection or coin jar. So to summarize this section, no visible doubling on the lettering, no mint mark suggesting Denver origin, unless there's one hidden in the photo angle I'm not catching. A small area of environmental discoloration near the date that isn't a mint error, and an overall moderate level of wear consistent with genuine circulation. Nothing screaming rare error at this stage, but that's exactly why the next section matters, because there are specific, subtle types of errors that require a much closer, more technical look to identify. and that's what we're covering next. 6. Common errors to look for. 260 words. Now that we've done a general visual inspection, let's get into the specific types of errors the collectors actively hunt for, because this is really where the value conversation gets interesting. Even on a common date like 1975, an individual coin with a genuine mint error can be worth significantly more than face value, sometimes dramatically more, depending on how rare and how visually dramatic the error is. The first, and probably most well-known type, is the double die error, often abbreviated as DDO for double die obverse. This happens during the die-making process itself, not during the actual striking of the coin. Here's how it works. Dies are created using a hub, which stamps the design onto the die in multiple impressions to build up the full depth of the image. If the die shifts even slightly between those hubbing impressions, you end up with a die that has a subtle doubling built into it, meaning every single coin struck from that die will show the same doubling. This is different from just a blurry or double-struck coin, which is a different kind of error entirely. A true double die shows a clear, consistent secondary image, usually most visible in the lettering or the date. To check for this, you want to look under magnification, ideally with a jeweler's loupe or a macro lens on your phone camera, and examine the thickness and shape of the letters closely. If you see a distinct shadow or split in specific letters, not the whole coin, but specific letters, that's a strong sign of a double die. Next, let's talk about off-center strikes. This happens when the coin blank, called a planchet, isn't properly centered in the coining press when the dies come down to strike it. The result is a coin where the design is shifted to one side, sometimes with a noticeable blank crescent of metal on the opposite edge where no design was struck at all. These are usually pretty obvious just from a glance. You don't need magnification to spot a significant off-center strike. The value of these errors depends heavily on how far off-center the strike is, with more dramatic, more visually obvious errors generally commanding higher prices, especially if the date is still visible on the coin despite the shift. Then there's die cracks and cuds. As dies get used over and over to strike thousands of coins, they wear down and can develop cracks from stress and metal fatigue. When a crack forms, it can transfer onto the coin as a raised line of metal, since the crack in the die creates a gap that gets filled with metal during striking. If the crack becomes severe enough, particularly near the edge of the die, it can break off a piece of the die entirely, creating what's called a cud, a raised, blob-like area of extra metal on the coin with no design detail in that spot. These are relatively easier to spot because they show up as raised, irregular lines or lumps rather than part of the intended design. Repunched mint marks, or RPMs, are another category worth knowing, though these mainly apply to certain earlier eras when mint marks were hand-punched into each individual working die rather than being part of the master hub. If the mint worker punched the mint mark, then had to reposition and punch it again, you'd get two overlapping impressions of the same letter, like a D that looks like it has a faint second D slightly offset from it. It's worth noting that mint mark punching methods changed over the decades, so RPMs are more commonly associated with earlier date ranges, but it's still worth knowing what to look for if you're examining coins across different years. Beyond those, there are planchet errors, which happen before the coin is even struck. This includes things like a clipped planchet, where the blank metal disc wasn't cut correctly and is missing a curved section, giving the coin an incomplete, bitten-off appearance. There's also lamination errors, where impurities or gas pockets in the metal cause the surface to peel or flake in layers after striking, leaving a rough or cracked appearance on part of the coin's surface. And in rare cases, you get wrong planchet errors, where a coin is accidentally struck on a blank intended for a completely different denomination or even a different country's coinage. These are among the most valuable errors when they occur, simply because of how unlikely they are. So how do you actually check for all this at home? The most practical tools are a jeweler's loupe, which you can get inexpensively, or a macro lens attachment for your smartphone camera, which lets you take extremely close, detailed photos. Good, even lighting is critical. Try to avoid harsh, direct light that creates glare on the coin's surface, and instead use soft, angled lighting that lets the raised details cast small shadows, which actually makes doubling and die cracks easier to spot. Once you've examined the coin closely and you think you might have spotted something, the next step is comparison. There are numismatic reference resources and error coin galleries maintained by professional grading services and long-established collector organizations where verified examples of specific errors are documented and photographed. Comparing your coin against those verified examples is a much more reliable method than just guessing, because a lot of what looks like an error to an untrained eye is actually just normal wear, contact marks from other coins bouncing around in circulation, or minor imperfections that don't affect value at all. For this specific coin we've been examining, going back to what we saw in the last section, no clear doubling was visible in the lettering, the strike appeared centered and complete, and I didn't see any raised die-crack lines or cud formations. That doesn't rule out something being present that's too subtle to catch on camera, which is exactly why, if you genuinely suspect an error on any coin, the right move is always a closer in-person inspection or a professional opinion, which we're going to talk about next. 7. GRADING and value, 910 words. Let's talk about how coins actually get their value assigned, because this is the part that a lot of people skip, and it's honestly the most important part if you're serious about figuring out what a coin is worth. The coin grading world uses something called the Sheldon scale, which runs from 1 to 70. It was originally developed by a numismatist named William Sheldon back in the 1940s, and it's still the standard used by professional grading services today. At the very bottom of the scale, grades like Poor 1 or Fair 2 describe a coin that's barely identifiable, heavily worn, sometimes damaged, where you can just barely make out the design. As you move up, you get into good, very good, fine, and very fine grades, which describe coins with increasing amounts of visible detail remaining despite circulation wear. Above that, you have extremely fine and about uncirculated, describing coins with only the slightest traces of wear. At the very top of the scale, from mint state 60 all the way to mint state 70, you're describing coins that never entered circulation at all, no wear whatsoever, though even within that uncirculated range, there's a huge difference in value between a coin with a few minor contact marks and a coin that's essentially flawless under magnification, which is what separates something like a mint state 63 from a mint state 68 or higher. Here's why this matters so much for value. The price difference between grades isn't linear, it's exponential, especially as you approach the top of the scale. A common date coin in worn, circulated condition might be worth face value or just a few cents. That exact same coin, in pristine, uncirculated condition with a high numeric grade, could be worth many times more, sometimes dozens, or even hundreds of times more, simply because so few examples survive in that condition. Most coins that go into circulation get handled, dropped, stacked, and worn down within just a few years, so finding an old coin that somehow avoided all of that wear is genuinely uncommon, even for a date that was minted in the billions. This is where third-party grading services come in. These are independent companies that examine a coin, authenticate it, assign it an official numeric grade, and then seal it in a tamper-proof plastic holder, often called a slab. This matters for value because it removes the guesswork and the trust issue. When you're buying or selling a graded coin, you're not relying on someone's personal opinion of the condition, you're relying on a documented, professional assessment. High-value coin sales, especially the ones you see reported in the news for large sums of money, are almost always graded coins, because serious buyers want that verification before spending significant amounts of money. Now let's talk realistically about pricing for a coin like the one we've been examining today. A circulated, common date 1975 penny without any verified error typically sells for face value up to maybe a few cents when sold in bulk to dealers who value them mainly for their copper content. If a coin like this were in exceptional, uncirculated condition, which would be unusual for a coin that's 50 years old and clearly shows some circulation wear, it could be worth more, but we're generally talking single dollars, not the massive numbers you see in clickbait thumbnails, unless there's a documented, verified error involved. On the other hand, If a coin has a verified, well-documented error, a strong double die, a dramatic off-center strike, or something in that category, the value can jump significantly, sometimes into the hundreds or even thousands of dollars range, depending on how rare that specific error is and how much collector demand exists for it. I also want to flag something important here. Be very careful with online coin marketplaces and social media listings claiming huge values for common coins. A lot of these listings are simply asking prices set by the seller, not actual sale prices, and asking price means absolutely nothing if nobody's actually buying at that price. The real indicator of value is completed, verified sales, auction records from reputable auction houses, or sold listings with documented final prices, not just someone's optimistic listing price. If you genuinely think you might have something valuable, the smartest move isn't to immediately try selling online, it's to get a second opinion first, which is exactly what we are covering in the next section. So let's say you've gone through your own coins and you think you might actually have something special. Here's exactly what I'd recommend doing, step by step. Step 1, and this is critical, do not clean the coin. I know the instinct is to make it shiny and presentable, especially if you think it might be valuable, but cleaning a coin, even gently, even with something as simple as rubbing it with a cloth, can actually destroy its value. Collectors and graders specifically look for the coin's original surface. Cleaning leaves behind tiny scratches, even ones invisible to the naked eye, and it strips away the natural patina that builds up over decades. A coin that's been cleaned often gets classified as damaged or altered by professional graders, which can cut its value dramatically compared to an identical coin that was simply left alone. So no matter how tempting it is, leave the coin exactly as you found it. Step 2, photograph both sides in good, even lighting. Use natural light if possible, or a bright, diffused light source, and try to avoid glare or shadows that hide detail. Get as close as your camera allows while keeping the image in focus. This is where a macro lens attachment really helps if you're using a smartphone. Good photos are essential whether you're comparing the coin yourself, asking for opinions from other collectors, or eventually submitting it for professional evaluation. Step 3, compare your coin against verified reference images of known errors and varieties. There are established numismatic organizations and grading services that maintain photo galleries of documented authenticated errors. Comparing your coins side by side with these verified examples gives you a much more grounded sense of whether what you're seeing is a genuine error or just normal wear, a contact mark, or environmental damage, which is far more common. Step 4, get a second opinion. This could mean visiting a local, reputable coin dealer, who can often give you an initial read in person for free or a small fee, or it could mean submitting the coin directly to a professional grading service for an official evaluation. Yes, grading services charge a fee, so this step makes the most sense once you've already done your own research and you have a reasonable basis to believe the coin might genuinely be valuable, rather than sending in every coin you own. And step 5, maybe the most important mindset to walk away with. Understand that rarity alone doesn't guarantee a high price. Value comes from the combination of rarity and demand. A coin can be objectively rare and still not sell for much if there isn't a strong collector base actively seeking that specific variety. On the flip side, some coins that aren't even that rare can command surprising prices simply because they're popular and widely collected. This is why professional input matters so much. It's not just about identifying what you have, it's about understanding what it's actually worth in today's collector market. Follow those 5 steps, and you'll approach any coin you find with the same process serious collectors and dealers actually use, instead of guessing based on a video thumbnail promising an unrealistic payday. 9. Recap plus verdict, 420 words. Alright, let's bring this all together and give a final, honest verdict on the coin we've been examining today. We started by looking at the broader history of the Lincoln cent, from its introduction in 1909 as the first U.S. coin to feature a real person, through the wheat penny era, and into the Lincoln memorial design that this 1975 coin belongs to. We covered why the composition matters, with this coin coming from that pre-1982 era of 95% copper content. We talked about why 1975 specifically gets attention in the collecting world, mainly because of the famous no-s proof error. But we made the important distinction that this specific type of error only exists in proof sets sold directly to collectors, not in coins that circulated through everyday pocket change, so it's not something you'd realistically expect to find in a regular coin jar. Then we did a detailed physical examination of this exact coin, checking the lettering for doubling, the date and mint mark placement, the Lincoln Memorial detail on the reverse, and the overall wear pattern. Based on everything visible, this coin presents as a standard, circulated 1975 Lincoln cent, showing moderate wear consistent with genuine circulation, with no clearly visible doubling or dramatic minting errors. We walked through the major categories of errors collectors look for: doubled dies, off-center strikes, die cracks, repunched mint marks, and planchet errors, and none of those were clearly present on this coin based on close visual inspection. So here's the honest final verdict. This particular 1975 penny appears to be a common, circulated example. That means its realistic value sits close to face value, maybe slightly more if sold for its copper content in bulk. That's not the exciting answer some people want to hear, but it's the accurate one, and accuracy is what this channel is built on. That said, this doesn't mean the coin has no value at all as a collectible piece, and it definitely doesn't mean every coin from this era is unremarkable. It just means this specific coin, based on everything we can observe, is a normal example rather than a rare error variety. And honestly, that's the outcome for the vast majority of coins people check, which is exactly why, when a genuine error does show up, it's worth getting excited about. 10. Call to action/outro, 280 words. So that's the full breakdown on this 1975 Lincoln Memorial penny. If you found this helpful, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who are into coin collecting just like you. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe to Coin Collectin' One and turn on notifications, because we're breaking down a different coin every single week, sometimes common dates like today, sometimes genuinely rare finds, and I always give you the honest truth about what something's actually worth, not exaggerated clickbait numbers. I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you have any old coins sitting around at home? Any specific dates or coins you want me to break down in a future video? Drop them below, and I'll pick some of the best suggestions for upcoming episodes. And here's your homework before the next video. Go grab that jar of loose change sitting in your house, or check through any old coins you might have inherited or forgotten about, and actually look at the dates. You now know exactly what to check for: the mint marks, the lettering for doubling, the overall condition. You might not find a jackpot, but you might be surprised at what's actually sitting right under your nose. Thanks for watching all the way through. That means a lot, and it genuinely helps this channel grow. I've got more coin breakdowns coming very soon, so stick around, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video.